All right, we are live.
Hotel, peace, greetings. Of course, to all those who are joining us today. Of course, this is we're Melaneyes Media. This is our Black Conversation Tuesday morning. My name is Aundar, the co-founder of Melaneyes Media. I guess one of the first things, just want to wish everyone a prosperous and hopefully peaceful new year moving forward. And of course, we're very excited to be back here this year with an opportunity to continue to have these conversations we've been having over the past few weeks and, of course, months when it gets down to our Sunday presentations. With that said, we like to just go right into the conversation and start this dialogue about things that are impacting us as a people, our ideas and concepts. So I know my brother, Born Logic, has something for us, and we're just going to go from there. All right. Hotel, my brother.
Peace, Aundar. Peace and greetings, family. Thank you all for joining us. Once again, we do welcome you to subscribe to our channel, Melaneyes Media, here on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook and also on Instagram at Melaneyes Media on both platforms. And so once again, our Tuesday conversations, just touching on topics that we think are important. And so this week's topic is the whitewashing of history. And so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to pull up a slide, and then we can kind of get into details and really have a discussion. What does that mean? How does that look, Aundar?
It looks good, my brother.
Okay.
Yeah, clear.
All right, so whitewashing the history. And one thing I did is I pulled this image that I saw was very popular a little while back on social media. This brother, Jonathan Harris, created this painting called Critical Race Theory. Seemed to spark a lot of conversation. I know the brothers from Detroit. I follow him on Instagram and just have been kind of watching his journey since this painting. But when you see this image, Aundar, what do you think when you see this?
It's kind of straightforward. And I think it speaks to, of course, the challenge when we talk about CRT and other things like that today. But the fact is, it's like washing away or wiping away or painting away our history, and in some way to hide the truth of us as a people. Of course, I think this picture here speaks volumes, and sometimes it's easier just to create a painting or something where people could see something. And of course, it takes the place of the many words we try to use to describe, this idea of whitewashing. But I think this is really on point because it seems to suggest and definitely indicate that someone is taking time to just paint over our history, to white it out. And of course, and it's interesting because once that's finished, the white paint is covering everything. You walk by a painting like that, all you see is this white paint, but you don't know what's underneath it. What once was the picture or the image that it presented. So, and that's like our history, you whitewash our history, and then all of a sudden we don't know our history, we don't know our story. So I think this is very powerful, brother.
Indeed. Yeah, when I see that image, I thought it was very powerful too, just because, they had the ancestors back there, and then to see this man with the paintbrush literally just going over the image. And it says it all, in my opinion. And I think that's why it sparks so many different conversations.
Yes.
However, when doing research, just kind of digging a little bit, I did not realize that the term whitewashing is a relatively newer term as far as popularity. And then I didn't realize that it had its origins with filmmaking. And so it was really in reference to actors, playing people of color, per se, in roles and things of that nature. So I'll read what I found.
Okay.
Although white actors have been playing characters of other ethnicities for centuries, often employing blackface, redface, and yellowface, the term whitewashing didn't become popular way to describe this practice until the late 1990s. So I thought that was very interesting. And then it went on to say, according to Merriam-Webster, whitewashing as a term revolving around white supremacy debuted in a 1997 issue of Afro-American Star, in which Wiley A. Hall wrote, "Finally, the movie makers must not be afraid to lie, especially if it makes us look good. Hollywood has been whitewashing history since movies were invented."
No doubt.
So just kind of thinking about the concept of where that term came from and what comes to your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, it is a new term because I mean, it was not something that I grew up, you know, being familiar with, but I think it's very fitting, you know, for what it's describing. You know, this is the issue in trying to understand our history as a people. Our history in many ways have been whitewashed. And when I think of whitewashing, I think of, you know, of course, your history can be just denied as if you don't have a history, which is very troubling because as humans, we make history, we record history. And if there is no history, saying there's no history of us as a people, then basically it denying our humanity, basically saying we are not human, which then I guess justifies the injustice and oppression and exploitation and so forth. Of course, that's destruction, of course, denying, and of course, history being destroyed. Because, you know, sometimes we talked about some of the things that have been destroyed that was created and developed by Black people. And I know we'll go a little more into it. And then just the fact of sometimes it being disguised as to basically say that, look here, we take Black people of history and we give them a white face, you know. And I think one that always stands out to me, of course, is when we look at Kemet, ancient Egypt, you know, when you think about destruction, many times you look at the monuments there and you see the nose has been knocked off these monuments. And then you ask yourself, why would someone go through and knock off the nose? You know, what would be the whole purpose behind that? Well, it's just suggested and that the nose had the nose features of a Black person. And then of course you have movies that have just obviously just taken actors and put them in characters that were not European. So of course you think of the film like the Ten Commandments, Yul Brennan playing Ramses II. I mean, of course, we talking about a Black man, but we're talking about a white man playing a Black man. So to me, that's what comes to mind when I really see this and think about the idea of whitewashing history.
Indeed. And, you know, I think that when you really look at the term, how it became popular, and if you look at the painting, I think what it reveals is that whitewashing a lot of times is with the imaging. It's not always so much the telling of the stories, it's just the whitening of the characters of the stories. It's taking history from a perspective that's global, that affects original people, and then giving it a Eurocentric spin, or people basically just putting themselves in the powerful positions in history, which says a lot because, like you said, history is very important to a people. It invokes identity. And when you deny a person's identity, their history, their lineage, their traditions and customs, you're removing them, and then you can minimalize them and their importance in society and in history and civilization. And so I think it's very important that we be aware of whitewashing when people are taking our stories and putting a white face or a European spin to it or Western spin on it. And we have to always do our due diligence to find the truth. And if we know the truth, then share the truth and tell it.
That's an excellent point, brother. You know, I'm gonna ask this, brother, because I think it's a question that really I've pondered upon and really kind of trying to better understand. Because this idea of whitewashing, let's take names, for example. Because as enslaved Africans at the time we were brought here initially and being stripped of our names, African names, and now being, of course, branded with European names, and of course, this is what we passed on. When we read history books, for example, And if we look at the name, and the name looks like an English name, and I think Malcolm made a great point of this, when he talked about the Irish having an Irish name for a Black man, or a Chinese having an Irish name, but the idea of having a European name, how does that impact, or how does that play into whitewashing of history? What I'm asking, because we read a name and sometimes we assume, and for a quick example, is that I had read the name Charles Drew, and automatically, not knowing the history of Charles Drew, I assumed that it was a white man that had played a significant role in blood banking, and saving thousands, if not millions of lives. But we read our history books like that, and we see these names, and if we don't know better, we see basically English or European names.
Right. No, I think that's a good point, and I think that's part of changing of an identity of a people. I think that's why strategically, when we were brought here, we were stripped of everything that will remind us of our true selves, of our homeland, and our natural way. And so, by taking away a name, which is part of our identity, taking away a culture, our traditions, things that we could pass along, trying their best to strip those things from us, so that we would have no recollection of our past, of our exalted past, and then we don't have a good view of ourselves. And I think that the naming is just part of the puzzle. Yeah.
Appreciate that, brother. Now go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, just really thinking about, with the films and the movies, because that's one thing they said, that this really became much more of an issue with the filming, with the film industry. And since the beginning, and you can think about the first blockbuster that we had here in America was Birth of a Nation. We're going back to 1915, and even during that time, derogatory images of Black people, but even a majority of the quote unquote actors that were portrayed as enslaved people were white people in blackface. So they wouldn't even have actual Black characters. They would have blackface. They would paint their faces to try to appear to be darker skinned and things of that nature. We know blackface minstrel shows and things of that nature was very popular in the early 1900s as well. And I think this is kind of part of it. I mean, even just going so far as to do that. And then we know later on it turned into whiteface. They basically take Black characters and then put a white face on them. So I think it's just important that we understand the impact of just whitewashing.
Yeah, and I think it speaks volumes again, brother, because we're all we come familiar with these films, and we take these films as facts in some time, So when we see an image, we see somebody being portrayed in a film, we almost assume that it's almost the real person, and that's what they look like. Of course, some movies try to do that, but then some movies don't even care. They just say, we just gonna create this image, and you assume for yourself what they look like. But I think it becomes very challenging for us as a people, especially when we talk about our young people, when they sit down in front of the television and see these films or these images, and these images may have names, again, of Black historical figures or people who had significant impact on history, but again, they are presented and portrayed, if it's not just in film, but in cartoons and so forth, white images. So they walk away thinking that this is what the person really looked like. And of course, the damaging part is that if that person looks like someone else, but in true history, that person looked like them, then they have been denied an opportunity to identify with the greatness of that person and see it in themselves when they look at that image. You know what I'm saying?
Indeed.
So I think it's this is why I think, what we do, and I know other people are trying, we're doing our best in this stage of our ownership of our history and ownership of creating the images, making sure that we bring forth those images that are more honest and reflective of us as a people. You know, I always think of, because when we do the celebrating Black women and we present Queen Ty. I mean, out of ancient Kemet, that image is so powerful to me because it's obvious you're talking about a Black woman, and this Black woman has a great history in ancient Egypt, Kemet, and then she was the grandmother of King Tut, the mother of Akhenaten. So now you get a whole different view of what the ancient Egyptians looked like. And I think that's why we have to be very strong and determined to present the true and correct image in our films and anything that we're producing as a people. If it's in our textbooks, our films, or wherever, we've got to make sure that we do honest work.
Indeed. I think, and so when we talk about the image, that's one aspect, but as I was reading, they were talking about how whitewashing could also be how the civil rights story is told now, or the Civil War, pardon me, is told as being projected as something that was about states' rights as opposed to enslavement. Like the fighting had nothing to do with slavery. It was more about the states wanting their own rights individually and their sovereignty. And that's whitewashing. That's taking something that was real that actually has something to do. A huge portion of it was about the fight over slavery. Yeah. But to make it seem as if it's something else, to dampen or soften the blow so people don't feel guilty, is revisionist history. And that's a form of whitewashing too. To take things from the past, to make them seem a certain way, to skew the angle of it, so that it makes people more comfortable nowadays, because we don't want to offend anybody in today's day and age. And so that's a part of it as well. And I think we also have to remain vigilant with that, is that we have the proper perspective when looking at history and to call out white supremacy for what it is. Because if it is a constant effort to always dampen the blow when the characters are white, if it's always a effort to elevate a person from European ancestry and things of that nature, we got to constantly stay on top of that, because that's a perspective. It doesn't make it true.
No, and I think that's a powerful point there, brother, because I think that's it's a softer way sometimes of whitewashing history, that revisionist history of making things that were not true and balanced. And when you just stated that, it brought about two things out of that time period of our physical enslavement. One was that, sometimes it's just presented as if we just went along happily almost in an enslaved state, which is not even humanly possible. I can't see that. Of course, we did what we had to do for survival. But sometimes in these films or even in the writing, sometimes it's just presented that way, that there was no defense, there was no opposition, there was no attempt to overthrow the system of slavery and oppression. So we have to correct that. And then the other thing is that during and I know we made a very pointed effort to acknowledge that during the Civil War, we made sure that we acknowledge the fact that this is very much about slavery for us. It might have been about something else for some other people, but it was about slavery definitely for us, the end of slavery, and how the victory of the Union very much was carried out forth by those Blacks who joined the Union and were really a serious fighting force and had a significant impact on the victory. And of course, many times we don't even have that point of history, that honest perspective of history of how Black people fought for our freedom. It wasn't we were just sitting around on the plantation waiting for somebody to come free us. No, we was willing, and we did take up arms to fight for our freedom. And that's the point.
Indeed. Another example comes to mind is the whitewashing of the cowboy story and the lure of the West. Because when we think about the term cowboy, a lot of us go back to these movies from the 40s and the 50s with Caucasian men sitting on top of horses, not realizing that in certain parts of the West, over 60% of the cowboys were black men. Even the term cowboy lets you know that it was most properly going to a black man, because a white man at that time wouldn't be referenced as boy. So even the term and the vision of cowboy, that image being co-opted by once again the film companies in Hollywood, also looking at the thought that, you know, we hear about the Lone Ranger, not realizing that that character was based on Bass Reeves, a black man. And so just understanding that, hey, it really does run deep, and it's something that's so it's so regular in American society, we don't even notice sometimes.
You know, when you just said that, though, it causes me to think, and it should cause all of us to really dive deep into our history, for one, because the point you were just making about cowboys and how there were many black people in the West, you know, settling in the West, and of course, very significant part of that history. And I think it really brings the idea that if we don't know our history, then true enough, people can whitewash the history, and we walk away again thinking that this is the actual image of those people that we may hear about or read about or learn about through these films. And of course, we know they're inadequate and they're incorrect in their portrayal of these people, who then we read about in storybooks, and we think, again, going back to that image that may have been presented to us, you know, in those Western films. You know, growing up, brother, you know, you might have had different experience, but I didn't know there was blacks cowboys. I didn't even realize that, because all these Western films, for the most part, they had white men, you know, being, you know, gunslingers, cowboys, you know. And I think it causes us, or should cause us, to really become more ingrained in studying our history, more studious, and document our story, telling our story, and again, you know, presenting the correct image of these stories, especially when it comes to us as a people.
Absolutely. No, I definitely agree. And I have to share this article with you I found too, because they list about just 10 different things that deal with whitewashing that you don't even think about. You know, they go into education. And one of the things they spoke about was the fact that even in advertisement, you know, when you see images of beauty, and when you see skincare products and things of that nature, even how the constant promotion of white models and people that are white, just even in our advertising, has an effect on the psyche and also on our purchases. But it really does run deep here in American society.
Yeah, because then, I mean, that opens up a whole nother level of whitewashing, because basically what you're saying, and what is, you know, the fact is that we live in a dominant white society that is projecting its image everywhere. I mean, hell, if you want to, we get technical, and then we start talking about, and this had come up recently in a conversation we was having about this image of this white Jesus, and where did this image come from? And I was sharing with the brothers and sisters about this guy, Warner Salmon, who made this painting in the 1940s, I think it was the head or heart of Jesus, and became the most popular painting in the world, you know, distributed all over the world. But this was the, you know, imagination of somebody who, I mean, he can imagine Jesus, what he looks like in his mind, but this becomes an image that is almost accepted as factual, actual image of this you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I think it becomes very serious, because we're living in that kind of world where, I mean, everything is almost whitewashed, to the point where if we're not very diligent and very cautious, 100 years from now, Dr. King, we don't know what Dr. King may look like in the society, the way it's set up to date, and how he will be projected in the future.
Indeed. Yeah, I think there's a lot to that, and I'm glad that we could touch on this. But once again, I also just wanted to, just highlight the brother, Jonathan Harris, for that painting. Because I think, like we said, ultimately, sometimes an image is worth 1,000 words. So you can say a whole lot. However, to really kind of come face to face with art that depicts our history and kind of shares a narrative and shares a story is really important. And it also just reemphasizes how important, just going back to the filmmaking, how this term whitewashing really came about. We can also use our power within our own media to reverse that, to show things in their proper perspective, to put the Black lens back in its proper angle so that we can see things through our own vision and through our own worldview.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that note forward, brother, because I think ultimately we have to, of course, identify the issues, the challenges that we face, but we also have to start really realizing that we are the solution to these problems. If we're living in a world that's whitewashing history, and we know the negative impact it's having on us, then we have to come and have a corrective lens and making sure that one, we don't continue to feed into it, and then what would be the steps in order to correct it. So maybe before we kind of leave out, if you have some thoughts about just some first steps in helping to address this issue of whitewashing, especially when it comes to films and images like this.
Well, yeah, I think we all realize the power of media, and that's many different forms that it comes in. When we talk about our youth, our children, books with Black characters, dolls that are Black, paintings, art, even T-shirt images, I realize even those types of things are important. Cartoons where we can never see ourselves. We need to constantly inject ourselves into our own view and our own vision. And so the more that we see us, the more that we learn about our history and deal with some of our great scholars who have uncovered Black characters, Black narratives, and things that have happened that we can learn more about. I think that's the key to reversing that polarity.
Excellent, brother. I think that's a good note right there.
Indeed. And so once again, family, we would encourage you, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If this is your first Tuesday conversation, you can always go back to our YouTube channel and see previous posts. We've been doing this for a little bit, so we got an archive of different topics that we've touched upon. Give us your feedback in the comments. We love to hear from you, and visit us at melanizemedia.com. And with that, we're going to sign out. I hope that you all have a positive and productive rest of your day.
All right. Hotel. Peace, family.
Peace.